how is it possible that this era is an era that triggers it easily, the Kundalini awakening, and at the same time being so depleting in the life circumstances for so many people? And I can ask that on a general level. I mean, we are so, let's say, burnt out and overworked, etc., in so many aspects and so stressed out. How does it come that a modern nervous system has an easier path to awakening, or maybe it's easier to awaken it and way harder to survive it? Because maybe when I talk about our first conversation that we recorded, it was about living off the grid. I mean, living in nature, being in sync with nature instead of with EMF fields in a big city. That is something that you called as essential. So essential for your nervous system being able to carry on this process after awakening. I'm just super curious, how does it come that this era has some kind of complement around the is some kind of Kundalini talented? It surprises me.
Yes, it's a paradox. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, you know, when people living in the modern world and ideally confronting or becoming aware of all the abuse, the damage that they have suffered, whether consciously or unconsciously, over the duration of their life, whether willed or not willingly exposed to all of this depletion, as you say, is a stripping back. It's a stripping back of the defenses. It is an exposure, and it is a process of coming closer to the nerve, so to speak. Yeah. We start to cut it really close. We are laid open, more vulnerable. We could be in situations or ongoing processes where there are not the typical or the expected, needed resources to tap into. But here's the thing, the way that people have been tapping into the resources, not only their own inner resources, but nature's resources, the environmental resources, has been in these programmed, conditioned ways. And it could be that the way that we have been surviving, the way that we've even had our needs met, and we've been taken care of, or we've been taking care of ourselves, are limited. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I'm someone essentially who sees the silver lining of that endarkened cloud, and I see very much the curse as a blessing. Mm-hmm. And so I see this stripping back and this emptying and this vulnerability and this hypersensitization and this exposure as a accelerated training, as a big push, you know, forwards in this way that we don't even have the choice as much as we would have in other ages. It's a choiceless choice. When you're on the edge of that cliff, and it only just took one thing because your system is so stressed that would send you falling into the seeming abyss, into what is called the dark night of the soul, right? Yeah. Today. And so it just took one little thing to send you flying. I've met people in my research who have had their Kundalini spontaneously awakened because they literally were pushed off a cliff and they landed. And when they've landed, whether it was coming off a horse, whether it was some terrible injury, accident, so often that was such a massive hit, blow, let's say that, a blow to the base of the spinal cord, to the coccyx,
It's so fascinating how again and again we touch on the momentum of trauma and as an opening door to being initiated to divinity or limitlessness. And it is a kind of limitless experience, because I think in the essence, trauma is a full death experience. If you zoom into that, something dies inside. So you know death intimately by being traumatized. And this opening the multidimensionality, without glamorizing that, without minimizing that, but really it opens up to something beyond duality and beyond your kind of conditioned orientation, and you somehow can't fall back from that. You might suppress it, you might suffer from flashbacks, etc., but a trauma happened. It will never be unhappened. That's such a strong relationship between suffering and the end of suffering. It's so beautifully and stimulating into so many directions that really cross cultures and really, I think, cross cultural traditions and spiritual traditions in their terminology and in their way of how they refer to the same momentums over and over again, something being too much. If we talk about pain or exposure. And just one small fragment from my side. It's interesting how you refer to, for example, me, I experienced it day to day, this wasn't my choice, being somehow fried in the MF fields in big Western cities. And there is a parallel to Kundalini phases, where the energy works primarily in my nervous system, underneath the skin, especially, I mean, in my case, in my hands and in my feet, a little bit in my head. There is a kind of electric charge of heat, of friction, of drying that feels very similar to the EMF fields of my culture that I'm living in and that's around me 24/7. So that's super interesting. The parallel or the reflection of exposure and our most dangerous maybe health risks in modern ages being a curse and being a kind of blessing. But it's also one thing that I want to point out, that Kundalini, first of all, is not only fun, and at the same time, it's not only blissfully eye-opening, and it's not only healthy in that way. So there's a lot around guidance after the awakening that I feel very curious about. I think it's not only the circumstances of the straight shot and then it happened and then you are on your own, baby, but really, okay, what to do after that? So I would be very curious about aspects of caretaking. May it be by the individual, I mean, ideally by the individual, but then also by the surrounding, may it human or being nature or whatever kind of surrounding. But what can you do in order to support a nervous system to digest the undigestible and to thrive in the living as a paradox?
Yes, this is a very important question. And because these Kundalini awakening experiences have been witnessed, documented over the ages, there is also a whole science that is age-old and time-honored, that is the receptacle. It will answer every and any question there is that they can be posed, I feel, in my experience, to the questions of how to support the human being in their limitless form, how to support the human being in their limited form in such a way to protect them, to strengthen them, even as they start to allow for the osmosis, for the penetration, for the saturation, for the circulation, and eventually the assimilation and the embodiment of the limitless. How to preserve the changing form at the same time as embodying the changelessness or the infinite or the immensity, the overwhelming. And this is therefore going to be a vast topic. And what I'm talking about, the science that I'm referring to now, is Ayurveda, which is the science of life. And it is the science of longevity, how to live as fully as possible on all levels of being, how to hack contentment itself, a functional, integrated, holistic contentment and freedom for as long as you wish. And this is Ayurveda. So right now I'll give you one answer, because I agree, even though we're in this age and we're being stripped back and our nervous systems are being overwhelmed and stress is becoming very much the norm, and we're experiencing hurry sickness, I would say that one thing, we don't have to suffer, that there is a way to live, to be both in the world, to be both on the grid, but then at the same time to strengthen resilience, to shore up and bolster and replenish and have a rejuvenated system, that we can have both at the same time. And the key would be to look to the nervous system and to protect the nervous system, but not just the nervous system, obviously the endocrine system, and every system within the system, the digestive system, the circulatory system, the respiratory system, is to really take care, the science of self-care, the art, the master's practice of self-care. From the very moment you open your eyes and you become aware of yourself as you start to wake up in bed, to the very moment you turn the bed down and you slip under the sheets again, that there be this art of living in such a way as to adapt and integrate into this world to protect ourselves. So again, to embody these three consciousness powers: creation, preservation, and dissolution, day to day. This is Ayurveda. And this is, it opens up a whole a host of possibilities for us to talk about.